generally the techniques for failure are the ones that surround just doing what everybody else is doing, not being innovative, and especially doing whatever the government wants you to do. So if you're going to be successful, that means you're going to have to swim upstream and go completely counter to the orthodoxy of the day. So the heretics are the ones that are going to be successful.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. Today we have a returning guest, Joel Salatin, co-founder of Polyface Farms. He's a renowned author, lecturer, and full-time hands-on farmer using alternative methods and innovative ways of combining technology and tradition to help people to be self-sufficient and to intelligently live on their own and raise their own food for their families. Joel, thanks for coming back to join us again on Reluctant Preppers.
It's my honor, Donegan. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I was hoping that you could follow up on some of the wisdom you shared with us in the past by delving into a topic that you've talked on, which is what we know just ain't so. We've had other members of the financial community and others on here to talk about, the news that you're not hearing on the news, things that they're not telling you. And I understand that you're a great one for dispelling and debunking misconceptions that are prevalent in our culture around about food, about sustainable living, and so on, our impact in relationship to the environment. So if you wanted to kick us off, if you could first give us just a real brief understanding of what brought you to put together the thinking for what we know just ain't so.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of traveling and speaking to all sorts of different audiences, and a fair amount of speaking at colleges, for environmental sciences clubs, groups, and things like that, endowed lecture series, things like that. And after a couple of them, a couple of years ago, it just dawned on me these similar refrains that I was dealing with. Every time I opened it up to question and answer, here, these were the things that just kept coming up all the time, and it was clear that the students just knew that this was true, and it's simply not true. But this was their assumption. This is what they were being taught, what they assumed to be true. So much so that it had become pretty much like a paradigm to them, and a paradigm, of course, becomes our subconscious decision-making psyche, if you will. And so I thought, well, I just, Mark Twain used to say, it's not what I know that bothers me, it's what I know that ain't so that bothers me. Anyway,
yeah,
he had that little ditty, and so I thought, well, it'll be fun to just play off of that and say that and just do a speech on what we know that just ain't so. And I try to couch my vinegar with some sugar and some humor.
As did he. Yeah. You make me think of the famous philosopher Socrates, who said the unexamined life is not worth living. So let's examine some of these culturally accepted so-called truths. How about the first one? Eating meat is bad for the environment. True or false?
False. Again, it depends on what kind of meat you're eating. That's the thing. The UN's Long Shadow report and the World Watch, Wildlife Fund's reports and things. Here's the thing you got to remember: all the data is based on an incorrect type of farming model and processing model, and you can even say distribution model. But anyway, it certainly is an improper production model where cows eat corn, chickens and pigs are crammed up into factory farms. Nothing is finished on pasture. In fact, omnivores don't even see pasture their whole lives, and there's no exercise, there's no sunlight, there's no sunshine, and the whole operation, the production, is segregated from its food source, so that instead of the animal manure being a blessing on the land whence it came, it's a toxic, hazardous substance piled up, on land that doesn't need it. And so when you begin looking at the status quo, at the system the way it is, the automatic assumption is, oh my, eating meat is bad for the environment. But the truth is that if we put these animals out on pasture and we begin producing them in a way that honors their pigness, cowness, chickenness, whatever, and give them a natural habitat, not only are they benign for nature, they're actually very beneficial to nature. And in fact, 600 years ago, what is today North America actually produced, arguably twice as much animal protein as it does today, even with hybrid seeds, factory farms, and John Deere tractors, and drugs and pharmaceuticals and chemical fertilizers. That should give us all pause. So the truth is that the great soils of the planet were all built under herbivores with prairies and predator-prey interaction. And I could talk for an hour, but I know we don't have an hour to talk on just this one topic. But the truth is that animals raised correctly, animals can either be the most devastating thing to the environment, or they can be the most healing thing for the environment. It all depends on how you're raising them. And so rather than just becoming a vegan and denying your own body of the value of these good proteins, I suggest that you find your good producer and patronize so that we're throwing our money after the land healing system.
Yeah, you make me think of stories I've heard from, for example, the state of Minnesota, where they were having real debates on the urban landscape being transformed for these huge factory feedlot operations and manure lagoons. And there was a break in a manure lagoon that completely contaminated the Minnesota River a few years back. Also in the Toledo, Ohio area a year ago, where the entire metropolitan water supply was considered undrinkable for a period of days because of largely due to runoff from agricultural manure spread on lands or ran right up against a river that tributed into Lake Erie, which is the water supply. And so you could rewrite that. Instead of eating meat is bad for the environment, maybe it's dirty factory farming is bad for the environment. So let's do something better.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That actually, or if you want to be real positive, you say that eating soil building, carbon sequestering meat enhances the environment.
There you go.
We could make it completely positive.
So what about the other truism that's out there? Safe food requires government regulation. Is that true or false?
Oh, that's false. We have this idea. This, of course, springs from the assumption that all business is evil, all business is bad, and businesses want to kill their customers, and no business cares about their customers. Now, I understand that there are certainly plenty of examples, and not the least of which is the current one with Volkswagen right now and what it's doing. But there are plenty of examples of shyster business. But the assumption that in general business is more honest, the assumption that government is more honest than business is an absolute falsehood. And so when it comes to eating safe food requires government regulation, the assumption there is that the only way that I can be protected from these evil food vendors, food businesses, is for a bureaucrat to get between my food and me. And the truth is that there are a lot of things that you can do to safeguard your food. One is to know your farmer. One is to grow food yourself. But there are a lot of ways to create security in your food system. The main way is just to not buy it at the supermarket. And when we start looking at the government's track record for telling us what to eat, remember the government told us to feed dead cows to cows for 30 years and gave us, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow. The government told us to eat hydrogenated vegetable oil instead of butter and lard, gave us heart disease and all sorts of maladies. The government subsidized high fructose corn syrup, so we ate Twinkies instead of quinoa sprouted bread, and you can just go on and on. The fact is that the track record, the the subsidized, encouraged track record of the government is pretty bad. In fact, our culture would be much healthier if the government had never told us what to eat. You can track the diabetes and obesity epidemic. You can overlay those numbers directly on the food pyramid that came out in 1979 and told us to all eat Twinkies and Cheerios rather than lard and butter and meat and potatoes. So those kinds of things are real. Those tracking things are real, and the truth is, the more the government meddles in the food system, the more unhealthy our society will be. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't privatize a regulatory system. In 1906, when Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle and exposed the atrocities in the corporate meat system, and at that time, it was considered monopolistic that 7 companies controlled 40% of the nation's beef supply. Today, 3 companies control 85%, and that's considered the free market. But the fact is that within 6 months of publishing that book, all of those companies had a 50% drop in sales and were facing bankruptcy, and that's why they went on bended knee to Teddy Roosevelt, of course, the socialist, and asked for government intervention to get their credentials back, so that they would so that people would buy their stuff again. And of course, Teddy Roosevelt, what he should have said to them was, "Hey, you made your bed, now lie in it. You go bankrupt, and we'll let some honest companies start." Instead, he said, "Yes, I'll give you a bureaucracy, the consumer advocates, the pennies. The government's got to help us. The government's got to help us." They of course rule the day. And, of course, politicians are always ready to start a new agency to help people. And so that's what they did. They started the Food Inspection Safety Service. And, of course, now it's perfectly safe to feed your kids Coke and Mountain Dew, but illegal to get raw milk. And so, that's where we've come in this progression. And so the truth is that there are lots of self-protection ways to protect your food supply. In fact, some people now are saying this is one I think you'll really like, Donegan. Some people are the thinkers, kind of prophecy type people are out there saying that the chat room, the internet, the ability to communicate via the internet is bringing society back to the kind of accountability communication that existed in a village 600 years ago. Look,
that's exactly what I was thinking. Accountability that comes from the transparency that happened from the lack of anonymity. Yep.
Exactly. 600 years ago, the shyster cobbler, the word got around. The shyster baker, the guy that had bad meat, whatever. The word got around pretty quick, and people didn't patronize him because everything was local, everything was accountable, and it was pretty transparent. Everybody, you went to church with these guys, you were in, your social groups, whatever, with these guys and gals. And so there was a tremendous amount of accountability simply by proximate, transparent living. Today, so we could argue whether we needed government intervention during the industrial system, but now that we're moving into the information system, we are in a lot of ways bringing transparency back, with rating systems and personal credentials and monitoring that didn't exist just 50 years ago. And so it's being argued that the government regulatory environment is an extremely industrial system. It's a large bureaucratic system which smacks of industrial bureaucracy, and that's not what we see in the malleable, sharp little innovative companies that we see, springing up around the information explosion, and that in fact that kind of bureaucratic, a la industrial regulation is now as obsolete as the industrial economy.
Now, your next point really piques my interest. It said nature is best when left alone, and and that's when or nature is best left alone. Reminds me of one of our kids. Our family would frequently go on hikes, and one of our children hated to go on hikes, even though he was quite strong and athletic and everything. And I said, "Why don't you like it?" Finally, he says, "They won't let me touch anything. They won't let me go off the trail." And finally, we got to the Badlands of South Dakota, and the ranger said on our first orientation hike, said, "All right, so as you enjoy the rest of the park, feel free to go off the trail. Just make sure that you try to keep yourself safe." And he's like, he couldn't believe it. Like somebody handed him the biggest present that ever happened. And he always wants to go back to the Badlands now because they let you go off the trail. So talk to us a little bit about the truism in our culture of nature is best when left alone.
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of faith to assume that everything, that the way the land fell, after creation or whatever, that the way everything fell together, the way the rivers carved out, the way that floods left the landscape, or earthquakes, or volcanoes, or whatever, that whatever it is, that everything is in its most perfect productive system to gather the greatest amount of solar energy and turn it into biomass and make the hydrologic cycle go and make the planet function correctly. Now, I totally get the fact that the average caring person looks down through the pages of history and sees a conquistador mentality generally between humans and our landscape, to where the exhaust of most civilizations has been partly to exhaust the resource base, and I get that. But what that's done is it has made people paranoid about touching and interacting with nature. And I would simply suggest that rather than environmentalism by abandonment, that the only way that we can that we can interact with nature with integrity is to lock it up in a wilderness area, state park, or whatever. Rather, the answer to that conquistador mentality is not abandonment, but actual participatory environmentalism, where we actually participate and we begin to caress and massage our ecological womb to actually make it better. I mean, building ponds, permaculture. That's what I like about permaculture. They're willing to say, look, the best thing you can do in a wetland is not just walk away from it, but put a pond in the middle of it. Then suddenly you have 50 more species than you had before, because you have deep water profiles along with the marsh. That actually creates more biodiversity and more resiliency in the landscape by actually putting a different, by embedding a different habitat in there. Building a pond up on high ground in a valley to eliminate runoff in the flood time and meter water out during the drought to stimulate the hydration flow. Those are very, very positive things. The idea that a bird happened to eat a cherry and spit it out flying over someplace, and that seed happened to sprout and grow into a cherry tree, that there's something sacred and untouchable about that particular cherry tree because it happens to be there where a bird spat out the seed when he was flying over, is just ridiculous. And so now I'm not for eliminating all the trees or just devastating the landscape, but I am for using our hands that have been used for hurt for too much, using them to heal instead. And the notion that the best thing we can do is just walk away from nature, lock it up, and don't touch it, dooms nature to its own willy-nilly devices instead of a very thoughtful, humble caress that the human mind and mechanical ability can bring to it.
Now, your next point, we can't afford local high-quality food, really hits close to home, both in my own household and in many of our listeners. We belong to a community-supported agriculture farm where every week we receive a share of the produce from that farm. It's a local organic farm. We also purchase an entire pig from a local meat producer, all naturally raised, and had it butchered by a local butcher. And by golly, those things are expensive. And we do talk about, gee, can we afford to sign up again next year like we did last year? We keep having this conversation every year. So talk to us about the bigger picture of what's behind that. What on that apparent sticker shock we get from buying high quality, high integrity local food? What's the hidden price, if we don't, et cetera? So.
Right. Well, the whole notion that we can't afford local high quality food is couched in the assumption. Again, you have to look back at the assumption. And the assumption is that we're not spending money on anything that we don't need. Now, I certainly know frugal families. We're certainly frugal, and I know frugal families. But I'll tell you what, if you look at your situation, I guarantee you there are things that are being purchased that don't need to be purchased, whether it's, iPhone, $100 designer jeans, soda pop, alcohol, cigarettes, lottery tickets. Now, I know, you may not buy much of that stuff, but all of us, if we really wanted to find another hour in the week or another $10 in the week, we could usually find it somehow. And the mentality is to quickly just run into this victimhood mentality that, I just can't do this. And the fact is, if you look at people that are getting government assistance, for example, how many of them are spending money on drugs, for example, and the fact that the liberals go apoplectic when somebody says, well, I think somebody should submit to a urine test before they get any government assistance. And if you say that, you're some sort of an outrageous, uncharitable person, is just, it's unspeakable. Look, I don't mind helping somebody, but, if I'm going to help you, don't drag your feet. And at least you can pick up your feet. And so I think that's where we are on this whole price thing, and to realize that when you buy in volume and you buy in unprocessed, and you process and you process, package, preserve, and that sort of thing at home, you suddenly can purchase at a lot more reduced rate. I was up in, this really came to focus for me. I'll tell you one story. I was up in the green markets of New York City, arguably the most expensive farmer's market in the world, and I asked my hostess to take me to the most expensive potato in the market. She said, I know just the guy. So she, we go through the crowds there, and she goes to this guy. He's got a beautiful setup. He's got, a credenza, basically, a kind of a slanted boxes there, wooden boxes, real beautiful, with about 20 varieties of potatoes in them. And, there were red ones and green ones and yellow ones and long ones and short ones and round ones and all that. And so I looked for the most expensive one, and I found this one. It was a little blue fingerling Peruvian potato for $1.99 a pound. Now, all around that green market at Union Square, there are supermarkets that have 100 feet of fluorescent lighted tiled floor space, shelf space, handling potato chips for $3 a pound. If you look at the per pound price, it's $3 a pound. You can buy the most expensive potato in the world, take it home and use your Fry Baby, your Cuisinart, your Slicer Dicer, whatever thing, and you can make, the potato chips that even kings couldn't imagine having, and you can do it for way less cost than those $3 GMO generic potato chips from the supermarket. So what it takes is it takes a commitment to participate in the system. And if you do, and you get your extraneous stuff out, nobody has to buy lottery tickets. You don't really have to join the country club. You don't have to go on Caribbean cruises. We don't need a Hollywood. We don't need a Las Vegas. You don't need People Magazine on your doorstep. The fact is that most people are more informed and more interested and more willing to invest in knowing about the latest dysfunction in the Kardashian household than they are, their own family's bodily fuel. And so generally, I think the price issue for most is is kind of it's an example or a manifestation of priorities, and of course, if you buy good food and you treat your body well, the chances are you're not going to have as many health issues, so that helps your costs. There's a lot of ramifications of putting money on good fuel.
Absolutely. There's the hidden price of the cheap stuff is that they're not really, the price you pay at the cash register is not the final price tag. It's just one part of it, and there's a lot more to it in how it affects your life and how it affects other people's lives and the environment.
Yeah, the whole externalized cost thing is a whole other discussion. We could talk about how incorrect the typical supermarket price is because of externalized costs, whether it's the 700 riparian dead zones in the country, or the fact that the U.S. now leads the world in the non-infectious causes of morbidity. That's not the place to lead the world. We lead the world in autism. We lead the world in lots of things, infertility. So these are all not things to lead the world in. I didn't want to go there. I wanted to just zero in on a family, a person, and how you can afford to
on your budget, your budget priorities.
Yeah, your budget priorities.
And the next one hits close to home too. For me personally, because I had both my parents were missionaries in Belgian Congo for 5 years. They said the U.S. needs to feed the world, and I can think of a lot of stories they told me, which were they came home with a very different perspective than what they left. But if you could tell us what that means to you, is whether that's a truism or whether that's a faulty thinking.